You know that something went wrong. Actually, I'm not able to.
The meeting is in.
Yeah.
Monica, I'm here. You can carry on.
Yes, Dr. Vijayashree. Correct. I would just introduce Dr. Bamin Tada to you.
Yes.
Can you see him?
Yes, I can.
Yes. So I was just telling him, actually, Vijayashree, I know Dr. Bamin Tada passed, I think, right from my college days. Okay, so that spans, I think, 40, 45 years. Okay, so after a very, very long time, we are virtually meeting.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, so, I was telling him, we were so worried about his connectivity mostly,
Right.
and I'm so glad that he's made it. Bamin, are you there? Bamin, are you there?
Yeah, he's there.
Yeah. Okay. So this is Dr. Vijayashree. She is the Dean and HOD of PG Department of Psychology, the St. Bishop Cotton College.
I see our other speaker also, Mr. Guru Prasad. Welcome on board, sir.
Thank you. Good evening.
Yes. Good evening.
Good evenings.
Yes. So Dr. Guru Prasad is the other panelist, and Dr. Bamin Tada is joining us from Arunachal Pradesh.
Yes.
And I think all of us are from Bangalore.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so nice to see you all because Bangalore is my second home without any house.
How nice. Let the pandemic be over. You can always come over.
Yeah.
Let me also introduce you to our other panelist, Ms. Kripalini Swami. She's here. Hi, Kripalini.
Hello, ma'am. Very happy
Hello.
to be here with all of you.
Yeah. Hello, Kripalini. Yes.
So I have on board Dr. Monica Ghosh and our other two speakers, Mr. Guru Prasad and Dr. Bamin Tada. Welcome to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So it's actually become a kind of a national discussion because we are from all over the country. I know a lot of people are joining from West Bengal, Andhra, I think even from Arunachal, if I'm not mistaken. And a friend of mine is also joining from the US.
Okay, nice.
So we have, yes, I think we have about more than 300 registered participants, right?
Right.
Yes. So everybody is very eagerly waiting for this discussion.
Yes.
So I think we are good to go, right, Vijayashree?
Yeah, we have about 85 participants. We'll start exactly at 4.
Ma'am,
yes, we'll start it.
Shall wait for another 10 minutes, ma'am, because participants I'm sure will join because we have only 90 participants.
Okay, Neha.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, ma'am.
You can put up the banner, I mean, if you want, actually, Neha.
Actually, the discussion was going on, so I didn't want to like.
Yeah, that's okay. Okay, I'm the screen so I can see.
Yeah.
So is it raining there, Dr. Bamin?
Yeah, it's off and on rains. Now winter is beginning to experience.
Okay.
In high regions of the mountain, Indo-China borders, snowing started.
Okay.
I just wish that you can visit once, northeastern India.
Yes, I think Monica Ghosh recently visited and she was really all about the place. So I think we should do that one day.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Next time we can have a offline meeting. Something like my wife is all a psychologist.
Okay.
She's nurse by profession, but she is specialized in psychology.
Okay, nice.
On CMC Vellore.
Okay.
So, but today she's not joining. Next time she can join.
Okay, that's nice to know.
Yeah, she can stand next to you. I think, why am I not seeing?
So Dr. Bamin, just to keep the conversation going, I'd like to introduce to you our other panelist, Ms. Kripalini. She
Okay.
is, she
Yeah.
is education entrepreneur, if I might call her that. She's into education and technology.
Okay.
Of course, a whole host of other things as well, being the youth ambassador at UNESCO
Okay.
and working in a very unique area of training people in integrity and compassion and kindness. So I
I
think
see. I
it
see.
brings a lot of value to today's discussion.
Thank you so much, ma'am, and very happy to meet you, Dr. Bamin. We look forward to having this conversation with you over the next 1 hour,
Yes.
and also with you, Mr. Guru Prasad.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so
Very,
nice,
very
madam.
happy to know about your program. When Dr. Vijayashree introduced you, I was very curious to know what you have been doing, what your projects are. Maybe after we close or sometime in the middle, you tell us something about,
Sure.
how you teach kindness. That's what is lacking in people.
For sure, Mr. Guru Prasad. In fact, that was a training program that we as youth who got selected for the World Youth Conference from UNESCO. In 2019, when I represented Harvard, Sussex, and Life University came together and created a framework of how to really have compassion being trained as a formal program. So I underwent that training and I was super fascinated and I wanted to bring it back to India. So I also did a facilitator course with Life University, and that's how the journey has been. But it's a super fascinating course. It's an eye opener for sure, and it deals on multiple levels of kindness towards oneself, towards other beings, and also to look at systems in a whole.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you are based out of Bangalore, Dr.
Yes,
Kripalini?
I'm based out of Bangalore. Yes, sir.
So nice to meet you virtually now.
Yes, sir. Same here.
Because Mr. Guru Prasad doesn't need too much of an introduction. He's all over the newspaper columns and books on the bookshelves of bookstores and all of that. Of course, the bigger professional background is his Director General of Police, holding really high office, and a completely down-to-earth man whom anybody can relate to at first interaction. Mr. Guru Prasad.
Thank you. Thank you. I think now we should start. Then,
Yes,
4 p.m.
I think we should. Neha, can we start?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Over-
ma'am. We have
over-
130 participants. We can start.
You can hand it over to Dr. Monica Ghosh.
Yeah, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this virtual discussion platform that we are having. I'm so glad that so many people have participated for this. And I'm Monica Ghosh, Director of Eudaimonic Center, that is collaborating with Bishop Cotton Women's Christian College, the PG Department of Psychology, to host this panel discussion. Bishop Cotton College actually needs no introduction here. It is a premier institute for women in Bangalore and has been operating and also has been training a lot of women in that college. It is one of the most prestigious colleges we have here. And we are so glad that the PG department has come forward to collaborate with us to mark the World Mental Health Day 2021. Which is actually tomorrow. But then, we are also celebrating the entire week on this. And this year's theme happens to be mental health in an unequal world. And, so we thought, let's have a panel discussion. Let's start talking about mental health, which is, is a enigma in itself. When we talk about mental health, it is talked about so much, but it is also so confusing to a lot of people. It is also stigmatized to a great extent. So we thought, let's start a discussion on this. So to quote Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore, who says, "You can't cross the sea merely by staring at the water." So we thought, let's plunge in to the sea of mental health, mental illness, mental hygiene, wellness, and well-being, which is really a sea in itself. And we thought we'll start with a discussion, understanding it, destigmatizing it, and creating an awareness about mental health, which is so common and widespread. And especially the pandemic has created havoc and has had a very bad effect on people's mental health. So we thought today we will have a good discussion on this, and a little bit on the Dr. Vijayshree's effort over here. I must thank her that she has come forward with her staff and students who worked tirelessly. Though this is a virtual meeting, virtual discussion, the technology and all kinds of things are still new to many of us, and it required a lot of coordination and cooperation. And so thank you so much, Vijayashree, for organizing this discussion, and all of us are on one page today. We were so worried that who would be able to join and who won't be. So thank you so much to make this happen. A little bit about the Eudaimonic Center. The Eudaimonic Center was founded in the 2015 by Dr. Vijayashree and I. Both of us are senior professors in psychology. And this is on the principles of positive psychology and health psychology, which is one of the newest branches of psychology, actually. We believe that happiness, positive attitude, virtuous life, and engaging in meaningful and worthy acts are catalysts in promoting mental health and well-being. So our work revolves around the same, to create an environment which promotes this. So many get curious about our name, and also find it very difficult to pronounce. We've heard all kinds of pronunciation of this name, which is Eudaimonic Center for Positive Change and Well-being. This is actually, we derived the name from a Greek word called daimon, which means happiness, self-fulfillment. And this has actually been borrowed from Aristotle, who used it for the first time. So we actually are engaged in 4 things, basically. Research. Just a minute, just bear with me. Yeah, we are engaged in research, education, training, and publication, and also in developing assessment tools for individuals in skill profiling. So we have engaged with many organizations to do the same. During the pandemic, we also set up tele-counseling center, a pre-tele-counseling center with the help of UNICEF, which actually gave succor to a lot number of people. So we also offer courses in life skills, mental hygiene, self-development, and counseling. So we are very shortly trying to start a online counseling course, which would be very unique. And I think somewhere, God willing, we will be starting somewhere in the month of November, in the collaboration with Care Institute, Chennai. In today's discussion, we have a very unique panel, very diverse panel, which is an interesting mix of coming from different backgrounds. So just a minute, I think something is going wrong with my, yes, but one thing which is very common among all the 3 panelists, that is Dr. Bamin Tada, Dr. Guru Prasad, and Soumya Murthy, is that they're very approachable. Their professional acumen is extremely high, and they are acclaimed so much, and they're so about their modesty. So we are so glad to have you amongst us, and I'm sure we are all looking forward to a very interesting kind of a discussion, because this is not a lecture, this is going to be a discussion where there will be more participative, and many people would be asking you many questions. So we're looking for that. So it gives me a great pleasure to introduce our guests for the event today and provide a glimpse into their work, which I know it goes into pages, but I have tried to shorten it so that we hear you more than about you. So Dr. Bamin Tada is a doctor twice over, one with medical degree and another doctorate in respiratory medicine. Besides, he has a string of other qualifications. He has held administrative and senior advisory positions with the Government of India, Arunachal Pradesh, and Northeast region, and continues to wear many hats as member of various important medical boards. Dr. Tada is a recipient of numerous prestigious awards from the state government of Assam and from state government of Arunachal Pradesh, and a lifetime achievement award too. This apart, he has received an appreciation letter for extraordinary services to the poor and the weak in Arunachal Pradesh from none other than the Nobel laureate, Mother Teresa. He's joining us from Zero Valley in Arunachal, which is a very beautiful scenic place on earth. We are very proud and honored to have you among us and listen to you. Dr. Tada, a very warm
Thank you,
welcome.
Monica.
Yeah, so we're just waiting to listen to you. We have also Dr. D.V. Guru Prasad. He's a rare combination of being a tough cop, an educationist, writer, motivational speaker, and a women and child welfare enthusiast. He has served as a DIG, Director Inspector General of Police in Karnataka, holding several important positions, and is well known for his efficiency and effective handling of very many sensitive issues. I may not be wrong when I say he's one of the most wanted person in Karnataka and neighboring states. Dr. Guru Prasad holds a master's degree in English literature and a doctorate in Indian writing in English. His passion for education, skill development, and capacity building saw him engage in institution building post-retirement. He was a visiting professor of criminology in Rani Chennamma University, Belgavi, is a resource person for many prestigious institutions, and is a much sought after speaker and on a range of subjects. Dr. Guru Prasad is a tireless writer with over 60 books in Kannada, 8 books in English, and a regular column and articles in newspaper and magazine to his credit. That's really one great achievement. We indeed are very glad and honored to have you, Dr. Guru Prasad. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Yes, I think we have him here. Yes, welcome
Yes.
to you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We also have Ms. Krupalini Swami. She's a young, energetic change maker and a youth ambassador whose achievements seem longer than her years. She's an engineer by training and has been in the field of education, playing different roles for a decade now. She's a founder of How and Why Education and Yan Project. Krupalini currently serves as a mentor for change with Niti Aayog and is the steering committee member of Global Youth Alliance for Kindness under UNESCO, which is which is a very innovative and meaningful initiative. She also serves as the chief operating officer of Vaibhav. No, I think I'm mispronouncing the name. I think it is EVOB. Yeah,
Yes.
EVOB automations that works with 350 plus schools across India that trains mentors and students on empathy. She also mentors startups at House of Genius at Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. We are very happy to have you here, Soumya. Yeah, we are very happy to have you, Krupalini, among us. And we're looking forward to a youthful and innovative perspective from you. A very warm welcome to you, Krupalini.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's a pleasure to be here amongst all of you.
Thank you. Without much ado, over to Dr. Vijayashree, who is the moderator of today's panel discussion. Thank you. Hope all of you are there, and you will surely have an interesting and engaging session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Monica.
Yes, over to you, Vijayashree.
A very good evening to all of you. I think on record and on the list, I have about 335 people who have registered. So a warm welcome to each one of you to this edition of World Mental Health Day 2021. Welcome on board to each one of you. I think this is an important cause that so many have decided to associate with. And it gives me immense pleasure to initiate this conversation today. I think it is, this conversation is very, very important because it's important for us to understand the issues that everybody is facing regarding mental health. Of course, the degree to which we struggle is quite different in intensity and depth. Why is this conversation important? Because it is the beginning of a solution to a problem. And I definitely hope that today it is not merely on a Zoom room, but it carries on into the world beyond. I simply want to start off by saying the more people know, the more they can do, and more they talk about it, more people are heard, and we can go on to seek a solution. I think that is what we are aspiring for today in this discussion. It's inevitable to start a discussion with the current pandemic that we are undergoing. And this has added twofold to the kind of mental health issues that has been thrown up today. It could be loss of job for some, loss of income, death of close ones. The grieving has been immense, and there is a fear of uncertainty, of constantly wanting to know when all this will end. And this has triggered a whole host of mental health issues, which I believe has not still come to the fore completely, and it is definitely calling for some kind of a redressal. I think this is an opportunity for all stakeholders working on mental health issues to talk about their work and what more needs to be done to make mental health a reality for all. So we are discussing today the theme, mental health in an unequal world. I think any illness, and more so COVID, is an equalizer. It doesn't spare anybody. And it definitely has not discriminated from the rich or the poor, the educated and the uneducated, male, female, children or adults, straight or otherwise. So when we talk about mental health in an unequal world, we are referring to all of this and more, and mainly on the issue of accessibility to mental health. So this is a platform where we believe and hope a lot of people from different backgrounds can come in and join this conversation, and together we can work towards a better world. In a world that is increasingly polarized, I think there are no two ways about this inequality that exists in mental health, be it stigma associated with talking about it, be it discrimination, lack of support, limited access to housing or employment and welfare. There are a whole lot of issues that need our attention. A lot has been done, but nothing is quite enough in this huge ocean of So I'm going to start with our discussion today by inviting our speakers to give us their perspective on from the background from which they come from on this theme of mental health in an unequal world. So I think in this discussion, time management is very crucial. I'm glad we've been able to start on time. And we will actually give each one of our speakers at the outset to speak for about 3 to 4 minutes from the perspective that they come from, share their thoughts and perspectives, and of course, then have some more time for specific questions. So as you heard in the intros, as Dr. Manika Ghosh introduced, they come from very different perspectives. And it was kind of intentional that we didn't want to have mental health professionals directly on this discussion, but wanted to have a whole world view about this. And of course, we have a lot of mental health professionals joining in on this discussion. We'll take that a little later, but I'm glad so many people have interest in this. And I'm sure each one of you are going to take away a lot of value from this discussion and continue this conversation. So on that note, I'm going to invite Dr. Bamin Tada to initiate our discussion, sharing his views and thoughts on mental health in an unequal world. So I give you about 3 to 4 minutes to express your point of view. Dr. Tada?
Thank you so much, madam, and the panel members, and also the audience, and especially Monica for giving the opportunity. And I'm so privileged to connect back to my studies in Bangalore Medical College 42 years back. And basically, I'm a public health person, and you know, finally led into the healthcare management. Had education from Bangalore Medical College, All India Institute of Hygiene Public Health, and BITS Pilani, and Harvard University in international health, and many other things. And looking around today, we're celebrating, and the world is the world population 10.7% of the population, counting having some form of mental illness. Is a huge chunk. And recently, the jump of quantum jump of the mental illness, the percentage of 10 to 15% last 1.5 years, and due to the COVID has really triggered to rethink the situation issues. India alone, we have a 7.5% of total population is having some form of mental illness, and that has been accentuated by recent COVID pandemic. And we have around 56 million depression-related and 38 million anxiety-related problems we have. But we have issues like here, problem is, and we have drastic shortage of, acute shortage of the psychologists and social workers. And we have a less than 0.5% for 1 lakh population against 3 into 1 lakh, which is very, very, again, we have a 0.3% psychiatrists for 1 lakh population, which is too small against 3 into 1 lakh. So the complex issues and attributes causing the unequal world has compounded the issues. So with this, I think we have to figure out how the small beginning we can do. Recent US studies have shown that there is depression itself, and 49 versus 40%, and anxiety 42% versus 30, substance abuse 25 versus 11, suicidal tendency 22 versus 8%. This is the recent study. US showed that the quantum jump due to the COVID pandemic. And also we see the society, I think it's out of gear because of the substance abuse, suicidal tendency, we said especially young people. And also our national mental health program launched in government, by government of India is not just enough to cope up the issues. The problem and challenges lies is very big. And ideally, they're declaring the mental health for all and make it a reality. Seems to be, I think, very challenging team that WHO has laid. I do not know what other our panel members is going to speak, but I'm sure I think this is one of the toughest challenges. And we live in a complex world and with diverse attributes, which is causing us concern. And because and you see, especially rural and urban, poor and rich, and systems, caste systems, color system, religious system, and practices is also the adding up to the complexity of the attributes. This is what actually I feel that this kind of interaction would be helping, and also the creating an awareness I feel that we have to, I would like to leave normalize just is important because even our medical professions, we feel the mental health is a different entity. It's not actually not. And we have to also equal and equalize it because our treatment or healthcare system as an altogether different way they look at the mental problems. And enough information and motivation is also essential. Giving knowledge, to the people that mental health is a disease like any other diseases. Unless we remove these barriers, probably I think we'll be in a very, very difficult situation to face in coming days. And also the world is acting to, that they trying to arm themselves to kill each other and destroy each other. We're looking around, humanity is going through one of the I think biggest crisis today. Civilized world is nothing but they're concentrating only to the weapon of mass destruction and wants to destroy each other. So we constantly, even the normal people who are living there, suppose I am from Arunachal Pradesh, see like China is claiming and trying to. So I think every citizen of Arunachal Pradesh have anxieties. You can imagine how it's great. Taliban has now taken over the Afghanistan. It has created the entire subcontinent, Asia continent, into globally, it has created a fear psychosis. So these are the few things which you have to, and the poverty is rising, also inequality is rising. So these are the few things which I thought is a very important issue to be discussed today. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor, for that perspective that you bring. I completely agree with you when you say that mental health, especially, requires a multi-sectoral and an integrated approach. And this definitely calls for the involvement of an entire society and community. So on this note, let me now invite Dr. Guru Prasad to share his views. Of course, he comes from a vast ocean of knowledge, real world, and from his scholarly reading and writing. So let me invite on board Mr. Guru Prasad. Sir, over to you.
Good evening, everybody, every participant. I'm very delighted to take part in this discussion because as most of you are aware, it is not the psychiatrists of professions, people related to mental health who do come across people who really need support. It is actually the first responder is always the police. Whenever you have a problem, like the moment there is a problem at home, you always think of the police first and not of the hospital, not of the mental health professional. So most of the time, you come to the police, and in the police department, we do deal with a large number. In fact, most of the people who we deal with are those people who have had some sort of mental issue or the other. Because if you have lost something, if you have lost your belongings, if you have lost your child, or if you have if somebody has attacked you, or if your girl has been kidnapped, it is always first, to relieve the tension, the first person you meet is the police. But today, I will not talk much about this, but I'll recount an experience of mine which will give you a perspective of what exactly the police faces. And I'll recount a real life experience, the experience which I myself had, which changed my entire view of women and children, and why I started working for that sector, that's the women and child. Why did I start working? I was the police commissioner of Hubli Dharwad, a large urban conglomeration of more than 1 million. And I got a call one day that a girl has been admitted to a hospital in Hubli, and they said that it was a case of rape. And as it was very serious, I did go to the hospital, saw the girl. She was only 14-year-old girl, and she was in the 9th standard. And I went with a woman police officer, spoke to her, and tried to find out what exactly has happened. She was very reluctant to tell me what had happened, but when she opened up, she told me that it was her father who had raped her. And she came from a very, very poor family. Her father was a mechanic. They were all living in a very small hut. Her family consisted of her father, her mother, her sister. So only 4 of them were in the family. And this girl was studying in a good school. She was studying in the 9th standard. And when I found out that her father had done that, and her mother was also with her, and I was very angry with the mother as to how she allowed her husband to do this to her own daughter. The mother, being a poor woman, she could not say anything. She said, whenever my husband comes home drunk, he becomes a devil. He becomes a devil. Nobody can control. I said, you're only 4 people out of you 4. There are 3 females. And how do you all the 3 of you can join? No, sir, you can't. You can't imagine how his behavior changes when he gets drunk. I said, why can't you leave him and go somewhere else? She said, I don't have any other place to go. Anyway, after the girl recounted and we took her statement, I heard some small little noise under the cot in which this victim was sitting. As a police officer, I was very curious to who was sitting there, why was the noise there. So I said, what is the noise there? And right below the cot came crawling out a very, very young girl. She was about 9 years old, 5 years younger than the victim. I said, who is this girl? They said that this girl is the sister of the victim. And I spoke to her, and as I was going back, the victim called me. Sir, I want to tell something to you in private. I went to her. I asked her mother and sister to stand at a distance. And the victim told me, sir, my father has not only assaulted me, but he has assaulted my sister also. And this is happening since the past 2-3 years. I was shocked. How could a man do this to his own 2 daughters? And that girl is very, very young, and they have not reported at all. This case of the elder daughter came to be reported to the police because there was a serious injury to her private parts, and that is the reason why they had to seek medical attention. Otherwise, they would not have come to the hospital or to the police. Because they came to the hospital, it was a medical legal case, and they came to the police. And I was very, very touched by this. I said, whatever it is, I will arrest this fellow within no time. And I told my officers to arrest him forthwith and bring him to us. Within about 4 hours, that fellow was arrested. And then I received a message from the hospital that the mother wants to talk to me again. I said, why does she want to talk to me again? Is she not happy that I have arrested her husband? And I went to the hospital, and she said, sir, can you release my husband? I was shocked. Why are you asking like this? Your husband has done such ghastly thing to your 2 daughters, and you are asking me to release. Are you not ashamed? I asked her. She said, sir, how long will he be in jail? I said, if we are able to prove this in the court, your husband will be in jail for 7 years. Then she started crying. Sir, if my husband goes to jail for 7 years, who are going to take care of us? How are we going to eke out our livelihood? And she said, please don't arrest my husband. Please release him. I did not know what to do. And subsequently, I was transferred from that Hubli Dharwad, and later on, I came to know that in the court, all the 3, the 2 victims and the mother, they turned hostile. They did not depose against the person who had perpetrated this ghastly crime, and they are still together. And this is unequal world. and police comes across such cases day in and day out. In the pandemic, many people do not know that 140 police officers in Bangalore died. 140. They did not know. They were very scared to deal with, but they had to enforce. They had to enforce the curfew. They had to help people going out to their migrating to their cities, and because we deal with such situations day in and day out. Even the police or people in this unequal world who are subjected to this sort of tension. So with this, I open the. I mean, I leave the field and ask the next panelist to take over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for bringing us the real world perspective. Yes, inequality lurks at every phase, sometimes out of compulsion and sometimes about things that we don't know. And there is so much of struggle out there, and I don't know who is fighting what kind of a battle. So to throw more light on this from a completely different perspective, and I think our next speaker, Ms. Kripalini, brings a positive approach to all of this and trying to at least counter negativity with some positivity. So let's hear it from you, Ms. Kripalini.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vijayashree. And it was amazing listening to both the perspectives of Dr. Taida and Mr. Guruprasad earlier. Here's my thought process. I bring this to you from the education fraternity. I bring this to you from what's happening in the K-12 field to whatever is happening in universities and the corporate training. So getting back to the point that we were speaking about in terms of mental health, a few things to note here. In my perspective, I think mental health issues have been there for quite some time. When I say quite some time, I think from whenever we as humans have evolved, it's always been there. It's just that the sinusoidal wave that we have, the good and the bad, whatever that we call, the amplitude of it, the variation of it, the depth of it, the degree of it has varied. And specifically during the period of the pandemic, what I've seen in the K-12 education is because kids are sitting at home, the impact over them has also gone far more beyond than whatever that we could have expected. And I don't think the system is even ready to manage that kind of an impact. Yes, we're talking about elder people getting impacted. At least you and me will have the literacy to explain what's happening to us, but the kids today do not even understand it because they're constrained to sit inside the home amongst the four walls. Having said that, the positive thing that I also see in this entire thing that's happening is, like I said, even if the amplitude of the bad has increased, the awareness of mental health has also increased in the same proportion. It was not, if you ask me in 2017, 2018, when we were talking about compassion, kindness, I don't think anybody even understood what a self-compassion or self-kindness. People would not even reciprocate with these words, but today I think people understand it. The literacy related to self-awareness, mental awareness has increased phenomenally. That's the positive side that I see. I also remember Mr. Tada mentioning about saying, the government also has to take a lot of good steps to make sure that, we are able to combat what's happening in the country today. One sneak peek of socio-emotional skills, I see that coming up in the new education policy, which is there. So the new national education policy, kudos to whatever that the government has done. Yes, probably operationally we might not be intensive. Operationally, we might not be able to put it into action at the current moment. But I think the thought process has started. People understand saying it cannot just be whatever that we teach in class in terms of the 6 subjects. Today, the generation has to get ready to be mentally fit as well, physically fit as well. So I think that's a good light that I see in Indian education system where things are changing. And also to come back to, whatever that we were talking about in terms of mental health and what really is happening, also to connect back to technology, because I also deal with EdTech, is I think, like I've been saying that, the sinusoidal wave has always existed. I think it's blown out of proportion today. The amplitude is very high, is also because of the way media projects it. Now, if you look at as humans, what really happens to us is how our brain basically functions is there is something called in the brain, the amygdala, which is responsible for, putting on the buzzer when there is a fear moment. And when you go back and watch news, when you go back and watch anything on social media, usually the content that's being given out there is to press on the amygdala, is to press on the emotional feeling of a human being. And what happens in this particular attribute is if you look at it, what I really believe is we are all COVID positive, irrespective of you and me have been COVID positive physically. I think mentally we're all COVID positive. We've all gone through it. We all believe what happens next. We all start thinking what's going to happen next. And that's the same thing that's happening with our kids as well today, right? So even the kids understand it. The kids talk about it like as if COVID's just there at their home. So coming back to the point that I was trying to say, I think what's happening with the technology advancement, obviously AI is killing the entire thing. AI is pushing the information in wrong ways. It is going to be one of the major barricades that the mental health warriors really need to work on. With that, also another thing that we also need to look at is any social media or any media, it's not to keep humans in the resilient mode. Now, if you ask any psychologist or a psychiatrist, what are they basically trying to preach and support? It's to bring us back into our resilience and not to make us hyper aroused or hypo aroused. But what happens when you come in contact with technology is, I think we are going into either one of these two zones. So it's important for us also to be aware with this entire discussion that's happening, also to be aware of saying, hey, am I going into an hyper-arousal mode? What is it that I can do for my mental sanity? How can I make sure that I don't consume this kind of information and it does not affect me? I think that's also equally important. And, for me, this has been a ray of light. Yes, COVID might have affected all of us in different ways, but I personally believe that this is a ray of light in the education system. A lot of things have changed. One good change for me is making sure that socio-emotional skills become a part of the curriculum starting from lower grades. And like what I was talking to Mr. Guru Prasad earlier, that we said compassion is a program that I train on. So I don't know if you're aware, all UGC students today, if they're in the final year of degree, before they graduate, there is a mandate saying that they have to finish this program. And that also comes from a country like India, the first country amongst all the countries in the world where they're saying, get trained on compassion, get trained on how to be kind towards your own self. I think that's the beginning of a journey where I see ray of light. So over to you, Vijayashree ma'am. So those are my thoughts that I have about education system here.
I like the note on which you ended. I think self-care is definitely the vaccine for good mental health. So I have that as my status message today and way forward. So I think I think each one of you have brought a certain perspective to this discussion, and from different fields. From Dr. Bamin Tada has been a joint health advisor to the government of India. There have been many policies in the making, and mental health has been included as one of the sustainable goals in the development plan. There are both global initiatives as well as local initiatives. And I think Karnataka has done exceedingly well on mental health. I don't know if it is also Bangalore, especially because of the association with NIMHANS and the work that they are consistently doing and all of that. So there are a lot of district mental health programs that the Karnataka government has launched. I was reading about it. And there is something called Mano Chaitanya, which is every Tuesday clinic that they have. A lot of effort has been done. And of course, the World Mental Health, the World Health Organization also has drafted a mental health action plan for the period of 2013 to 2030. And of course, their major objectives remain unchanged. It says more effective leadership and governance for mental health, integrated mental health approach, social care services in the community set up, and of course, implementation for prevention and promotion of good mental health, and of course, strengthened information systems. So in that regard, I think like our speaker Kripalani was saying, the kind of unnecessary media footage that keeps getting repeated to build these negative images in the minds of people who watch it incessantly is perhaps one of the biggest factors that really destabilize mental health, if I may call it that. So let's get on to questioning each one of you on, solutions are there, a program implementation is there, but let me start with Dr. Bamin. You've been in the government sector associated with the central government, and how much, and I think you have extensively dealt with different kinds of epidemics, and I think TB, HIV, all of these illnesses and diseases that you have worked with extensively in the area of public health. Now today, COVID perhaps holds a bigger share of this kind of an infection in the community today, and it has stretched the very scarce budget we have in health and unleashed a host of mental health problems in its wake, loss of lives, jobs, and all of that. So in a stretched budget, I know the government is doing their best in terms of the kind of rollout of vaccines that we've had is quite unprecedented in an emergency situation like this. We were not prepared for it, but the initiatives have been extremely good. But can you give us two radical solutions that this kind of a situation really demands, Dr. Bamintada?
Well, I think it's quite tough job you're given to me. Anyway, I think we need mental health, national mental health program has to be, I think, realistically relooked into as per India is concerned, because for which we need a strong political will, and not only political will, but we need to implement in the grassroots level, both in urban and rural. I think most of the mental health facilities are concentrated in cities and towns, not in the rural areas. So we need to have surveillance as well as interventional programs. Very important. Unless if we do surveillance and you cannot give them a proper intervention, then I think it's meaningless again. So any violent mental case we find putting there behind the bar, police custody or something is not going to be answered. I think country has to branch out with a huge chunk of around 66 million depression related and 38 million anxiety related disorders in the country. It's a huge chunk. It's like any other disease we are focusing today. So I think country has to incorporate in the planning, in the mental health has to be. But it's not only the government intervention is required. It also, unless we alleviate the poverty, unless we provide a job, unless we provide the that youth are engaged, or even the most advanced country, you see that the mental health is the United States, for example, it's one of the major issues. You go and run amok and just shoot around students and people around, that is definitely a serious issue. So I think mental health issue has to be looked into, but I think it's a very complex issue. What I feel, we have to. It will take a long time to formulate the viable remedy for this thing. I think even WHO has to think twice, and they have to really come out with this thing. But I think all resource, the manpower and money and the materials and facilities available to give the suitable remedial or interventional activities also is very much limited. So I think we have to just pray God that God is going to reduce the mental health cases in the world, and there will be happiness and joy everybody finds. Unless we are address this issue, like some countries like Bhutan and Sweden, it's a happy country. They declare definitely the mental health cases are much less. So
yeah, thank you, Dr. Bamin. I think you bring a very interesting. Yes, it is a complex problem. It's a multi-layered problem for sure. And there's definitely no single vaccine that can simply work against this. There are no booster shots, but like probably one of the points that Kripalani brought out in terms of social emotional education. So education is a real surefire remedy for this in terms of preparing young minds to build a resilient mind, and that will hold up to all these challenges that we have. And to be fair to our population, I think we are doing still exceedingly well under the circumstances. We are a resilient lot. And I think our resilience simply dictates our stress management skills. And I can see a very, very underprivileged child playing in the harsh weather, sitting on a mound of sand and jelly, but with the most disarming smile ever on her face. And this for me is a picture of resilience in a hard and tough world. So I think we have hope, and a hope is something that all of us have to breathe on and live on. So on this note, let me take the discussion over to Dr. Guru Prasad. Sir, you're a freelance writer, author of several books and articles. You worked in large organizations. I also understand that you were a lot into recruitment as well as part of your profile, planning, strategy, HR. All of this was under your this one profile. So, in your position as one of the top officers in the police force, you would have definitely seen humanity at its worst and humanity at its best as well. So, like you were narrating your incident, you've seen a spectrum of humanity. For example, especially in disasters like the current one that we are going through, the frontline workers, whether it be the healthcare workers, the police, as you mentioned, 140 of them have died in service during this pandemic. Now, what can perhaps be the equalizer to address this issue of protecting the protectors?
Dr. Vijayashree, I have two things to say in this regard. Number one, about the protecting the protected, but in general, you know, the victims of crime. I'm more worried about the victims of crime. Like, you know, I just now narrated about the case of rape. What really happened to that victim's sister? Subsequently, nobody knows. I do not know. Nobody else knows. Did anybody follow up the case? Did anybody try to counsel her? What has she become now? You know, it's been almost 25 years since this happened. What exactly has happened to her, we do not know. In my view, you know, when we have a government scheme in which there is a victim compensation scheme. In that particular scheme, some people, they can be given financial compensation. But what about emotional compensation for whatever emotional injury a person has taken? In this regard, I want to suggest to you, because you are in a college and you turn out many people are going to be future psychologists and future psychiatrists. If somebody can come together and work with these victims of crime, they can probably go to the police station and offer. An NGO can go to the police station, offer itself, and, you know, try to in US that sort of system is there. So try to identify the victim, go to the victim and see to it whatever the trauma the victim has undergone, somehow or the other counsel and make the victim come back to normalcy. This is one. Number two, the police themselves. We do not have any system wherein a person who has had this stress, you know, post trauma stress, PTSD, whatever it is. If a police officer who is involved in this, who is subject to this, at best, you know, what he does is takes to alcoholism, he takes to boozing, and most of our former colleagues are regular drunkards. They have become drunkards. So how can you wean them away? How can you? I mean, you can go to the police department, you can request them whether the people in the field, whether they require any sort of support. As of now, as you know, nobody goes to a psychiatrist or a psychologist and say, I have this problem. The problem is not identified by him at all. He does not. He normally does say that he doesn't have any problem as such. So the senior officers can identify and can match them with an NGO who can go and support them. And third, you know, we have as you mentioned about the recruitment and training, in the police department, before we select a sub-inspector, in the interview, during my time, we had a psychologist with us. We wanted the perspective of a psychologist to know whether this officer will be good as a police officer. Krupalini spoke about compassion, whether this person is having compassion or whether will he be a brutal police officer. But unfortunately, now the interview system has been scrapped. But for whatever job the government has, whatever important job the government has, if there is a psychologist in the board, in the interview board, or if we are going to give them, some psychological tests, because for in Israel, whenever you want to join for a government examination, you have to go through a number of psychological tests, and then only you are. Even now in India, it happens in many. So this sort of thing for government service, for recruitment, psychological tests that are necessary. If these three things are done, and to do this, the number of people, healthcare professionals, has to increase. As of now, the number is too small, I think, and this number has to increase, because, and probably in the new education policy, people can choose an engineer can choose psychology also as a subject. So when this happens, probably there may be a solution. But this is what, offhand thoughts of mine.
Thank you very much, sir. So I think you make a very valid point there. And I've had the privilege of being one of the psychologists on the board of interview of your panel for SIs. So I did have that privilege working with Professor, Raghavendra Auradkar.
Yeah.
So, and I also, Karnataka government has one of these initiatives of having well-being officers, I think from the year 2016, if I'm not mistaken. And I think their services are being on a kind of a contract. And I have a student of mine who's part of this well-being officer, and she says she goes to each one of these police officers and people affected by it, talk to them in their homes, and of course the family counseling, all of that happens. But again, it's just a drop in the ocean. And like you say, there needs to be a big increase in these healthcare workers itself. And yes, as you said, I'm part of a college set up as the Dean of Postgraduate Studies. We have been sending out batches and batches of psychology students, but we're just about 2-3 years old. But I know that a lot of them still don't find the kind of careers that they are looking for. So sometimes it is about, there's a very small setup like a NIMHANS that offers you qualification as clinical psychologist, a few other centers in and around India. And everybody else is practicing. We still don't have a licensing system that can actually qualify these people and probably bring in more into the healthcare setup for mental health care. And that is something that I think we should be working on a more bigger scale. And like you said, add to the counseling of these victims and their families is like the emotional compensation that you were talking about is a very, very interesting point, touches a chord in my heart that says, yes, I think that should be done. That little girl's picture will stay in my mind for a long time in terms of how could I help that girl grow up with a more positive mindset, because of something that an abuse that she faces is going to scar her for life. Can we ever erase that? That's probably an alert to all these mental health professionals that are here. And it's not just, you don't have to be a mental health professional, a caring neighbor, a sensitive teacher, anybody at all, a good friend who could listen to you, support you. Those are the kind of things we want. And I hope this conversation enables each one of us here. I see about 170 plus people. I'm sure each one of us can bring our own contribution to this aspect of mental health, not really wait for a government or an education system to bring in the policy changes. So on that note, let me come to Krupalini again in terms of, Krupalini, you bring with you so much of experience. You've been a mentor for change. You work with 350 plus schools. You talk about social emotional change and all of that. So you've been driven by this kind of the change maker kind of initiative that you have taken on. And I also read that you are talking about global best practices in some of these areas and spheres. What do you think could be some of the at least 3 best practices that we can bring on to make people more resilient to face these mental challenges?
That's an interesting question, ma'am. So before I take that, I would want to take a minute to answer to what Mr. Guru Prasad was saying. From UNESCO MGIP, which is the Indian representation of UNESCO, there's a lot of programs that we run on compassion, the similar ones that we've gone through. So if in case we can set up the entire training for the frontline workers or specifically for the police department, if you can put us in touch, sir, so we will take care of it and take it forward from there. It's a word from me. I'll probably get connected with you in a short period of time. And going back to, I think the interesting question that you asked me, ma'am. So here are a couple of things that's running in my mind while you ask this. One of the best practices that I've seen in the education system specifically is, I'm not sure if you've heard, a few schools today have changed the way that, students get punished. And you know that today we can't even raise our hand. There is a 20-page document written saying, how should we treat students in a classroom. With all of that, the good practices, which has also come into practice today, one of the most important things that I've seen is today when a student behaves with anxiousness, a student behaves with fear, a student behaves badly in class, I've seen a couple of schools changing the way that they handle a situation like this. What they do is they tell them you have to go into the meditation room, meditate for 20 minutes and come back, right? So I think it starts from there. It starts with saying, how do you handle people who react to certain things in a certain way. I'm not talking about traumatic people, whatever I'm talking about is on the grassroots level for kids, what can we do? This is one. The second thing that I also know is, there is this 21st century learning skills where they talk about saying today's generation needs to not just be trained on knowledge. They also say there are 4 C's that a student needs to get trained on, which is communication skills, critical thinking, collaboration, and their creativity. And just to go back to the framework for people who wouldn't know, I'm sure most of you are psychologists, but to make this a layman language to make people understand, let's assume this is the brain of a human being. This is where is our survival brain, which is the shortmost here. Whenever that there is a situation that happens, this is the one which most of the times that immediately reacts. This is where I was saying that there is that amygdala, that buzzer, which kind of keeps coming up because of the emotional, whatever that you have as emotions or feelings or your past experiences, that is accumulated here and the amygdala takes over. Now, what you see here is the prefrontal cortex or prefrontal cortex, right? So what I think in schools today, I've seen schools changing is to work on this like every other muscle is worked on in a human body. Like how you go to the gym today and you work on saying, okay, I'm going to lift weights and work on my biceps. The same way today, I've seen schools starting to adapt to this change of saying, I'm going to make my student understand logical reasoning. I'm going to make my student understand how to bring in empathy before making a decision. I'm going to make my student understand how to, whenever there is a delivery of a session, I'm going to make sure that my student understands how to make sure that this buzzer does not take the top lid off. Right. So I think these 2 things for me is something which clearly states saying, I think we are going towards a change. But again, there is always that sinusoidal wave. There is also positive into it. There is also negative in it. But I see these kind of frameworks, which evidently are trying to make a change in the society today, ma'am. So I think these 2 things is what I clearly see coming out in the education system today.
Yes, I think the government has already taken the initiative of the national education policy,
Yes.
bringing in these elements into the education system. I hope, like everything else, it's not stuck at the implementation stage. There need to be a lot of people trained on this. Teachers
Yes.
need to change their perspective. Punishment has to go the meditation way, positive way. So I hope there are a few policymakers and teachers on this discussion who can take that forward again.
And ma'am, if I may just add to the point that I just mentioned, one of the rules that's kept me going in spite of me talking about it, giving this much limelight about small acts that's happening is the 1% principle rule. So I don't know how many of you are aware of this. This is a very good way of looking at saying, can I be a change maker? Because I see a lot of people putting that kind of questions in the chat as well. So I'm going to probably take a minute to explain this. What it says is 1 to the power of 365 is 1. That means whatever I am today, if I continue to be the same thing for 365 days, I'll remain the same person. But if I decide to make a 0.1% change consistently for 365 days, which is 1.01 to the power of 365, will change me as a person 37.8 times better. And if I choose that I have bad habits, I'm watching the social media and it's kind of impacting me badly. Change by 1%, 0.99 to the power of 365 brings you down 1,000 times to 0.03. So every small droplet really makes a change. So if any of you think that I can't make a change, each one of you can. Sorry, ma'am, I took your time. Please go ahead.
Cumulative change is what we are looking at, and never too late, and not some. It's definitely something that everyone can do. So let me take a couple of more questions from the chat box here. It says, okay, government and the WHO have a lot of schemes and plans that they announce. How can I, as a common person, get accessibility to this? Dr. Bamintara, would you be able to expand on that? How can I, as a common person, reach out for these services? How do I have the accessibility to such facilities or schemes?
Yeah, actually, in any healthcare system, we really need to, it's not a one-way traffic, it is always the community participation is also important.
Right.
And private public partnership is also very, very important, because India as a country alone cannot handle 1.3 billion people. It's a colossal task. And we have seen that how much the economic, the country has to suffer because of the COVID last 1.5 years. And it's a colossal problem. And so the healthcare actually, as WHO, as Alma-Ata Declaration, says that it should be health should be handed over to the doorstep of the people for which community participation is required. And also it should be accessible. Accessibility should be there, affordable it should be there.
Right.
And the things, many countries have tried that kind of situation to translate the WHO's dictum. But I think only one country, which was a socialized healthcare system, was introduced in Cuba when Fidel Castro was there.
Right.
But I think no other country could afford to have the socialized form of healthcare system anywhere, any system, any world, even richest country in America. I think so. The private party plays a very important role. So I think accessibility is concerned. Yes, I think we should make the basic specialties available every part of the whether it's a rural and urban area. And affordability is of course depend on the degree and quantum or the of the sickness.
I take your
Some
point,
people-
sir. So I think it is about accessibility, affordability, and in reality, affordability or the cost of mental health care is really not as much as typical healthcare problems that we would face at other times. It's most often an unrealized kind of a illness that is lurking in people. So many times I can even go to a doctor and seek help on something like even something as a little embarrassing as an irritable bowel syndrome or menstrual cramps or whatever that is. But I hesitate to talk about mental health for different reasons. Of course, there is stigma associated with it. It requires courage to talk about it. I want to take this question to Dr. Guru Prasad and also probably summarize some of the questions that are coming in here, because it's already about 5:10 and probably going a little towards the end of our session. But there are so many questions. So you've been in recruitment, and there is a lot of stigma associated in a company when I admit or confess that I am suffering from some kind of a mental health condition, right? So people can give me a break, people can give me a time off. Other people are looking at me differently when I begin to announce that. There is so much of spoken and unspoken stigma attached to admitting in public that I am seeking mental health, help for mental health condition. How would you, as a recruiter, from the perspective of a recruiter, what would you have to say on this?
Dr. Vijayashree, I would say that in every organization, whether it's a company, whether it's an education institution, whatever, we should have some sort of a system in place wherein whether a person who is freshly recruited or whether a person who is already there in the company, they should have a system wherein they can come and speak to somebody, some counselor or a support group. So I was the CEO of Ramaya Group of Institutions. What we had done was every Saturday, every Thursday, we had a group of people to come and talk to the students. Every week, more than 100 students would come and tell them about various problems that they were facing, and that came back to me as the CEO, and then whatever that we could sort out, we sorted out. And but the very fact that there is somebody there in the organization to listen to me made things change quite a lot. This is one support group. Number two, you spoke about recruitment. We also can think of having lot of counseling, online counseling. You dial a particular number and then you see there is a suicide helpline. There are so many helplines, dowry harassment helpline, domestic violence helplines. So the police department as such even now has had a helpline for various people in distress, and the Bangalore City Police has an organization called Parihara. It has got a large number of mental health professionals to come there. People can go there. People who are victims of domestic violence, people who are victims of crime can go there, because people are really scared. Exactly, you said, they are scared of going to people in authority, but they are not scared of going to people who are not in authority. So we can have such helplines, we can have such support groups. And while recruiting in every organization, if a person declares that he has some mental problem, you see, we have to teach our people that it is not something very strange. Earlier, if a person said that he had a heart problem, everybody looked upon him with a lot of awe and lot of fear, and cancer similarly. But now people similarly, over a period of time, even a person who is having this mental health problem, the people will not look at him with some sort of a jaundiced eye. So things will improve. I have great hope that things will improve. But I would the Shazana has said, people start judging once you start expressing, but people, this judgment will stop when what Krupalini has said, right from the education institutions. If you say that this is not a problem, this is like any other disease. Mental disease is like any other physical disease. If we start teaching them from primary schools onwards, then there can be a solution found.
Yes, sir. So thank you for those really positive suggestions on what we can do, and I'm sure that's very doable. So I'm not going to disappoint my audience here. There are a lot of questions, so one of you can take it. So here is before I go to these questions, I have one person here called Preeti, who has something to add to this in terms of how accessible as a student, as a young adult, like you said talked about the helplines. I'm sure she has a story to share when she says, when I have a problem, can I have the courage, first of all, to speak about it? Who do I approach? So she did approach our eudaimonic center in terms of seeking some kind of help, and that was perhaps the first step that she did. I want Preeti, can you share your experiences and how you accessed help when you were mentally disturbed or having some kind of a problem? Preeti?
Sure. Hi. Thanks for having me here. So I think growing up, I've always been part of, convent schools where we had access to counseling. So that was my first initial. At school, we had a counselor, and but then it was not consistent. But I think initially, after I graduated from school and college, I started speaking to a few family members, and then I spoke to a few friends of mine. But then I felt like I was very confused initially, because I would get advice from my peer group, which would give me a type of advice. And then I would speak to a family and they would be a little biased in a way. And then I think that's when I reached out to different counseling centers where I got professional help. But I think again, there the trouble was with finance and everything. So, and then, so uh, I think with mental health, what I personally feel is that when one it has to be consistent, but then you need to have a place where you can be consistent and receive help at the same time without any problems with regard to finance um, or people being biased. I think that's when I thought, okay, it's better for me to who can actually diagnose and tell me, okay, there's nothing major wrong with you, but everybody have their own issues. But I think dealing with it is something that we all have to learn. And yeah, I think growing up in school, I don't think that's a subject that is taught to us. So I think just handling and just dealing with those emotions and understanding how to take care of oneself is something that I thought I would do by receiving professional help. So yeah.
Thank you, Preeti. I think that's a very fair point. Yes, schools have counselors, but I know from experience that counselors at school are burdened with a whole lot of other activities, like, when some teacher is absent, put her as a substitute teacher, and she has no time for the large one counselor for so many students, just doesn't work. And yes, financial concern is another very important one. And yes, to build resilience, and then you kind of work it out on your own. I feel so many people are performing less than their potential because of the self-limiting beliefs that are put there by family and teachers and schooling systems and peers themselves. So more hope to that, more power to girls like you who've been able to somehow counter it and surge ahead. And I know that's a point, and a very realistic point, that we have to pay attention to, and that's a point well taken. So, when I was in school, it would feel like, I think even Prince Harry, for example, has said, and I quote, "The experience I have had is that once you start talking about or experiencing a mental health struggle, you realize that actually you're part of quite a big club, right? There
Absolutely.
are many people out there." And I had this famous statement that when I failed at school, which was a couple of times in math when I couldn't clear the exam, I would come and tell my parents there are 20 others who also failed. Somehow being part of a club made it easier to handle. So when we accept that a lot of us are going through these struggles and coping with it in some way, I think it adds that power. So similarly to the Me Too campaign, for example, one spoke, two spoke, and then there were a whole lot of people that spoke about it. But I also want to ask maybe one of you, maybe Kripalani, this question. This Me Too campaign took off there. It was a mental health physical abuse and all of that has been going on and been there in the system for such a long time. And suddenly somebody speaks out about it. It caught up steam for some time, and then it died down. And then people were looking at these people saying, oh, this is what happened to her. Kind of a judgmental prejudice that I have against these people. I don't know if they really won the battle there, but what becomes of these people? And is there like a backlash that happens in these campaigns that I have to live with forever?
I think that's a very interesting question. So, okay, I'm going to share about a research work that was done. I can't quote the paper right now because I'm not able to think about it, the title yet. So anybody who's interested to read about this paper, please send me a message and I'll probably help you to read it. There was a study done about the Palestinian kid, if you remember, where a kid had been washed away to the bay. And everybody, till then, there was a lot of media talking about there is a lot of things happening in Palestinian region, and there was attention given. Till then, the number of people who are responding to it was very less. But the moment there was this picture of one kid that we saw, it spiked up super high, and it also came down in certain period of time. And they're trying to figure out, saying, what really happens. And also this is connected to how people actually market things today. So going back to what I was trying to connect to this point is, I think as humans, in that paper, what you see is, when we see that this is affecting only 1 or 2 people, we empathize a lot. We sympathize, saying, oh, this is happening to this person. Like the Palestinian kid, when you look at it, it shot up immediately. But the moment you saw that there was a larger community going through this, somehow our empathy kind of comes down. We start saying, I think, there is a bigger group. It's okay. Somebody else will take care of it. But when we see one person going through a problem, we really don't know why is it that our empathy shoots up to that extent. I think that's a beautiful research work that's been done by this particular researcher and that team. So I would probably, tell all of them who really want to know, go read about this paper. So I think that's the same thing that happened with the Me Too movement, or any movement for that matter of fact, ma'am. I think it picks up where the empathy goes really high. But when you see a lot of people coming and talking about it, then it becomes a norm of the society. It mostly comes down to saying, I think this is happening to everybody, and the empathy kind of dilutes. I really don't understand how that happens. I don't know how does the juices in our brain work in that way, but that kind of comes down, and that's what the numbers and stats also talk about in this particular research paper. I think that's exactly what happened with the Me Too movement as well.
Interesting observation that, and yes, we can go back to that study for more.
Yes.
And let me take some of these questions. There's this one interesting one from Saujanya Bhatt says, we often see people posting on social media that September is Suicide Prevention Week, and but fail to be compassionate and kind in real life. So being an 18-year-old, she wonders what are the ways in which she can help. I think that's a very fair question. Dr. Guru Prasad, can you add to that? I'm sure you have teenage daughters or growing up.
No, my daughters are not teenage, but anyway, what she can probably do is start her own support group, her own support. She need not go to anybody, and she can have like-minded people, start her support group. And just as Preeti mentioned, she went to her peers. When she faced a problem, she went to her peers and spoke to them. It is normally people of the same age. Probably if she has a group of students of her age, any person having similar problems of her age can come to them. As the first step, she can start a group of her own and start, listening to people, her classmates, her peers who are having some sort of problem or the other. And that itself will give her a lot of satisfaction.
Right. So, okay, there's another question here. So peer support is one of those methods. So it says, please suggest some points on how to deal with adolescents and young ones as far as their mental agony and gaps which occur during pandemic. Still, they're not in school. So I guess this is from a concerned parent. How do we deal with these? I think it's been a very difficult situation, stuck in the same home. Too much time with the family is also not too good for the soul. So how does one deal with it? How do you identify these gaps? Because I know there's been a pandemic of porn addiction, gaming addiction, and all of those gadget addictions that has come to the fore during this period. And one of our other speakers we wanted to have was Dr. Manoj Sharma, who's done a lot of work on this. So is there any suggestion that we can give this agonized parent? One of you?
I am an agonized grandparent. I want somebody to immediately tell, it has been really last 1.5 years. My children who are not going to office, they are working from home. My grandchildren not going to school, they are at home. It's becoming, really stressful. I don't know. Somebody should really give an answer to this.
I think parents have. Yeah.
Yeah, if I may add to this particular point, ma'am, I think this has been a problem for quite some time. So here are a couple of perspectives that I would want to bring to the notice of anybody who's a parent and anybody who's looking at things here. First and foremost, follow the UNICEF page, because you will see what's happening. They'll give you direct guidelines of how you should really manage kids during this particular time, either on Instagram or Facebook, because you'll also get good information from there. The second thing that I also want to share here is, at times what happens is, because we are in a developing country and we're not a completely developed country. One of the case studies that I would always suggest anybody to read is, why is Denmark the most happiest country in the world? And they stay there on the top notch notch for quite some time. What is the reason? So if you look at it, I don't think as a working generation, there's too much of stress that they go through. What happens when kids are staying home is this stress gets passed on to that kids as well. And stress from the parents and the communication that the parent is having, everything kind of gets into the minds of the kid. So try keeping that away. And then the second thing is also to probably look at what kind of conversations are you having with your kid. The conversations your parents had with you is not what the conversation that your kid is expecting from you. And these conversations should never come from a perspective of ನಮ್ ಟೈಮ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಆಗ್ಲಿಲ್ಲ, ನಿಮಗೆಲ್ಲ ಕರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿದೆ, ಇನ್ನೇನ್ ನಿಮಗೆ ಕಷ್ಟ. It comes from that perspective, then you'll never be able to counter or understand the thought process of what the kid is having. So yes, there is a lack of psychologists. The numbers what Dr. Tata spoke about, we know that the numbers are not good enough. We don't have enough number of people to take care of it. I think as parents, it's important that we start having these communications and building back that culture of dinner table is meant for conversations around what's happened in life, not to sit and watch a TV serial, not to sit and binge watch on certain things, or not. I've also seen a lot of parents today, especially if they have toddlers, if they can't feed kids, the moment that they see that the kid is not doing, they pass the phone to the kid. They say, watch the phone and start eating. I think it's also important as what is the traditions that you or culture that you really want to follow, and what do you want to pass on. So I hope these two things will help. Over to you, ma'am.
Well, yeah, the conversations that we want to have with children, they're not going to listen to my time kind of a story. So you want to talk to them in their language. And most often they don't have the patience with that. So the surfing mentality takes over. So they want to surf to some other person or source. So I hope it answers your question and to some extent, Krishna Kumar Dubey. So we'll also go on to other questions. Maybe I'll ask Dr. Monica Ghosh to take this. Are mental health services highly commercialized or commodified in an unequal society? And also, what if the importance of mental health practitioners themselves? They're subjected to such traumatic incidents, dealing with issues that may drain them out emotionally. What can they do to stay positive? Monica Ghosh, can you take that?
Yeah. That's, I think, a very pertinent question. Because when you say mental health professionals, firstly, let me just make a little bit of a, elaboration on that. Because when we say mental health professionals, there's a whole range of people who come in. There are counselors, there are psychotherapists, there are psychologists, there are psychiatrists, and so on.
There are also ASHA workers. They're on the field.
Yes, ASHA workers and part-time counselors and so on. So we feel, that is a very kind of a field which still is unexplored. And when we talk about people, I heard the panelists saying that there is a much more increase in awareness regarding mental health today, and people are willing to talk. There is especially at the urban level, urban educated, demography, people are accepting it. People are willing to talk. People are willing to reach out for help. But then when you say that, they are also very confused as to who to reach out to. That is a very big question, because I keep saying everybody, they straight away, there are lots of times people just straight away reach out to a psychiatrist. Okay. Now it could be a very mild kind of a mental disorder, or it wouldn't be a mental disorder as such. It could be just an emotional kind of a turmoil that all of us go through from time to time. It could be that you just at that point in time, you're very confused and you just want to probably just ventilate. You just want to get some kind of a direction. And that does not mean that you go directly to a person who medicates you. So I would try to always say that there are three things that you actually need to really realize whether you really need to go to a psychiatrist. First is that how frequently are you getting this? How frequently do you feel this way, that you are very depressed or you're very anxious and you're not able to do anything? You are actually, your performance is being, compromised, or your relationships are being affected. So if this happens very frequently, then how long does it stay?
Monica,
what is the duration?
If I may interrupt you there, I think the question was also, I think the question also was about, if I'm a mental health practitioner myself and I feel emotionally drained out, how do I cope with that?
Yes, that's I think, see, we used to have these kind of a counselor groups when we were counselors, from time to time, we would also have a crash course, because, and we would like to, rejuvenate ourselves, because many of us, when we deal with a lot of, cases which traumatizes and which also affects our mental health. So I think from time to time, we also need to rejuvenate. Because we have our emotions to deal with, and that is a very the self-help group of the counselors as well. There's a group of people who meet very often, and that is I mean, it's not one time training. It's not that once you just are a counselor, you're a counselor forever, because you could be also facing that burnout. So for that, to reach out that burnout, I think we should also reach out to each other and rejuvenate ourselves. That's a very important thing. Yes, Vijayashree.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. So I'm going to quickly summarize some of these questions. I think we're really running out of time, though we do have the time. I don't know about our speakers, so it's 5:30 now. So I'm going to probably conclude in the next 5 minutes or so. So Shazana is posting a question. People start judging once you start expressing and start speaking about mental health. I think we took that question in terms of the stigma. And Dr. Guru Prasad said, talk to the right persons and who will keep that confidential. So we can really talk with confidence to people who will keep it confidential. I think that's the message that I would tell you, Shazna. So people, and sometimes people say that you're talking about something because you want to get attention. So I think there, if somebody's craving for attention, you do need to give them a listening ear and sympathetic, empathetic heart. And I think that would solve many of the issues. Like Dr. Monica said, we don't have to go to the next level of treatment. We can just meet a counselor. We can meet a psychologist who will kind of give you much the same kind of advice that will put you back on track. You don't really need to go to a psychiatrist and medication. There's nothing really wrong with you. So most chronic illnesses may have some low-grade depression, is what somebody else says. The clinics and hospitals should have psychologists to assist the patient with that. I think there are a few corporate hospitals that do offer counseling to people who are undergoing terminal illnesses, or families of people who are going through trouble. But yes, the accessibility again is limited. There are a few hospitals that have it, and most hospitals don't. I think it's a valid point. Hospitals need to have psychologists and counselors to reassure people that they are in the right place and prepare them for the kind of medical treatment that they would be subjected to or will have to take. So I think, yes, patients need to be helped because they're going through a lot of stress and strain just thinking about the illness and the whole trajectory of it. And Varsha Shankar says mental health has increased in society, but not everyone has the accessibility to it. And this can be support, can reduce the inequality. And I think before this, I want to take Preet Prajapati's question here. He says, how can we be part of some huge programs that are happening and be part of bringing about change in mental health? I like this question simply because it says you're putting your hand forward and say, I'm there, I want to volunteer, I want to be part of this change process. How can we be part? So I think that's a very crucial point that all of us, I don't want this to be just an armchair discussion that we're having in an elitist circle. I would like us to take this forward. It's the mental health warriors, every student of psychology or other allied disciplines, as well as every member of society, I think has to join together in this effort to make this possible. And somebody has to lead. Who has to lead? I think it could be the decision makers, the policy makers, the teachers, the parents, community health support groups. Any of these can be. And I think just start a petition, start a support group. You have all social media that is there. We can whip up a group. So when I can have a bicycling group, why can't I have a psychosocial support group that can involve themselves? So I know a few youth groups that are actually doing this, and I'm sure that's the way forward. I'm glad you volunteered. I'm sure you will find some access to that. Preet Prajapati, you can get in touch with us and we'll surely mobilize efforts for that. So a couple of other questions. I think it's really important for us to first accept ourselves and stop judging ourselves. I think that's again a point that each one of us can take. Questions. Dr. Guru Prasad says that he also failed thrice. I find it hard to believe, sir. I think he's given us a book that people can help or read to talk about Neevu Omme Fail Agle Beku Part 1 and Yava Kashtavu Shashwata Valla Anta. So I think these are two good books that will give you direction, how to cope with failure, how to handle it and meet it head on. So definitely, I'm sure our audience will be delighted to pick up that book, sir. Okay, this is again Shazna, I think has a lot of questions. She says when she was in school, she had no idea about mental health and never really prioritized it, which was not right. She got to know about her mental health in her PUC. I think this PUC phenomenon, as I call it, is one of the biggest hurdles that any teenager has to cross. And parents and the entire family is engaged in this whole process. And your success or failure is determined at this crucial 17, 18-year-olds. And I think that's a huge battle that they have to fight. I completely empathize with this. So she says she had a few problems, wanted to share it, but she says you should have somebody called a mental health rep, not enough to have a class cultural rep and sports rep, but you have to have a mental health rep. I completely agree with you on that, Shazna. I'm definitely going to implement that in my college. I'm going to have a mental health rep who will volunteer and speak for her classmates. Ashish has a very valid point. He says, I think we should be trained to be unsuccessful as well. Isn't that an interesting point? So success comes easily and all social media is replete with stories of, but we should learn and maybe proclaim unsuccess as well, if there is a word like that. Today, we are going to coin that word unsuccess and really celebrate unsuccess as much. Dr. Guru Prasad, your thoughts?
That's the reason why, I said that I failed thrice. And when I failed 3 times, exactly like you did, in mathematics, somehow, it was really, really tough for me. And, everyone, at that time, I was in a very prestigious college in Bangalore, National College. Everyone was getting a rank and everyone was getting 100 out of 100. And I was the one who had failed. And the entire family, my family was stigmatized. People were, my parents had stopped taking me to their friends and relatives' houses saying that, what will they have, what will happen if they ask you what is. And then I, somehow or the other, I wanted to show to the world that I am not a permanent failure. Right. That's how, I could subsequently clear the All India Service Examination. My life itself is an example for people to come out and say that they have failed once or they have failed twice or they have failed. There is no stigma attached to failure. Exactly as there is no stigma attached to any mental health issue a person may be having. There is no stigma attached to failure. And as long as you realize that you are, as long as you think yourself to be yourself and not compare yourself with others. That comparison is really odious. Once you don't compare yourself with others, then lot of these mental issues will stop. That's what I feel.
Completely. So I think don't compare yourselves, and failure, like Hita says, we're all failures in some way, and it's only these failures which root you towards success. So it's always good to believe in that. In reality, failure is when you give up, not when you fail, is what she adds on. So I think it's a very positive note. I think Ms. Sania wants to ask Ms. Kripalani, I noticed that you have displayed your pronouns along with your name. How did you start introducing yourself along with your pronouns? How do you deal with any questions or comments that may follow?
I just answered that in the chat, ma'am. So quickly to tell, the reason that I also do it with pronouns is because I know what's my identity, what is it that I connect myself with, not because my body has 2 extra parts. It's because I recognize myself as a feminine energy, and that's why I say Shiva, her. I also believe that this is one way that I also want to tell the world, saying I'm opening my doors to tell me what is your identity. So I know when you write yourself there as they bar him or he bar him or they bar who, a few of them don't even want to recognize by a gender. So it's basically my way of saying, I'm open to accepting you the way you are. And I start with accepting myself the way I am.
Okay, that's very interesting. Interesting indeed. So One last question, maybe Srijita Bose says, this is what has been propagated time and again as a 24-year-old. I feel that hustle culture is doing more harm than good. Any one of you want to take that? Hustle culture, I'm not too sure what that is. Srijita Bose.
I think what she's trying to say, yes, it might be causing a lot of harm, Srijata, but it also is the way that we are living today. If you look at what's really happened is the time span of our focus as human beings has been consistently reducing. It's because of multitasking. It's because of we don't put our thoughts into one place. At a given point of time, even now, if I ask you, what are you thinking about? You're listening to me, you're here, but your thoughts are also somewhere else. And the hustle culture has obviously started from there. And it causes obviously more damage than the good. So it's about how do you train your mind back to come back to your focused attention of saying, where do you want to go towards? So I agree with what you're saying, but it also has its own benefits. In the interest of time, I'm not going to comment about that.
I think we are at 5:40 now, and I must definitely wind up here. A lot of questions, great participation from the audience. I think let me just close the session for today. I think 1 in 4 of us will experience mental health problems every year or through the year. That could be a family member, a friend, colleague, or it could be us. But I think a small way in which each one of us can get involved is simply organize. I think it must have stopped for some of us during this lockdown. Arrange a mental health get together. It need not be just for birthdays and things. Have a mental health get together in the supportive group that is your family and friends. I'm sure you can talk about your mental health issues and definitely get empathic responses from your own family. That would be one of the initiatives that I personally believe in, because sometimes when I talk about my physical pain, there's somebody else who says my pain is bigger than yours. So I also have a story to share. So I think it will create a kind of a ripple effect, and all of us start talking about our mental health problems. And I'm sure you feel good because everybody else is also going through that. So that is one of the initiatives that we could speak about. So for mental health professionals, I think it's a responsibility for each one of us. So friends, family form the first core group. Next comes the mental health professionals. Probably speak your mind, make your voices heard, because there's a big dearth for mental health professionals. Claim your space in the world today, make your voices heard by your service, as well as get involved at schools, colleges, temples, churches, public forums, break the barriers and start talking about it and bridge the inequalities that we can. Break those barriers. For the government, I think I would say more action on the ground, compulsory curriculum on mental hygiene and health. And of course, inequality is something that we have to live with. That's always going to be there. But on this World Mental Health Day, when we talk about mental health in an unequal world, I hope we have been able to provide a voice to the people experiencing this inequality. I hope, and I'm sure there are many public forums where we can start continuing this conversation that we've started today. And words, in my opinion, words move hearts, hearts move limbs. So listen, read, watch, and share, because the only way we can make change is together. On my note that I would want to end on a positive note is, let's act now. Let's join hands to advocate the importance of good mental health. Let's take a collective pledge as we put our hearts on our heart and say, let each one of us listen with sensitivity and support with generosity. So that's the slogan that I would like to end on. Thank you so much to all our panelists for being here. I would have loved to have each one of you give your closing comments, if you can, on one note, on just one sentence, and then we can close this session. Dr. Bamin Tada, closing comments.
It's an excellent opportunity for me to be connected back to the Bangaloreans and Kerala, this South Indians, because I always have a very high esteem about the Southern education and product of Bangalore, and my specialty recently with the people process, all these things.
Thank you, Dr. Bamin Tada. We were glad to have
you. It's wonderful to have a learned panelists like all of you, and you take me back my school, college days, and you are a very good teacher, excellent teachers, Guru Prasad and Madam Rabi and Madam Swami,
Thank you.
and also of course Monica has been always very very good teacher of mine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr.
Hope to connect back again.
Thank you. Dr. Guru Prasad?
Yeah, I will also take a pledge like you and say, let us start doing something for mental health from today, from now. Let us all act together and there will be a change tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for a lovely discussion. Thank all the panelists. It was a very educative program. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Guru Prasad. Yes, Kripalini, closing words.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity, ma'am. I learned as much as everybody else on this particular session. It was an honor being here. And one important thing is, I think today we are all becoming WhatsApp doctors and Google doctors for physical ailments. It's the same thing that's happening with mental illness as well. We all think, okay, I have OCD, I have anxiety. It's very easy to say those words. Don't connect it so easily. I think we all need that medical practitioner who can help us and work on yourself. Self-awareness is the first step and the most important crucial step which will take you a long way. And anybody who's interested to stay in touch with me, I'm Kripalini Swami. So you can find me on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and Facebook is usually a closed community, or you can write to me on my website, which is www.kripaliniswami.com. And it was an honor once again. Namaste, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I would just like to come here before you conclude, Dr. Vijayashree, is that from the Eudaimonic Center and Bishop Cotton College, I really am so grateful that all of you have come. And I think what we really, the discussion that ensued was beyond what we really expected. And the very fact that so many people have joined this discussion is actually gives us a lot of motivation to do something continuously like this. As Dr. Guru Prasad has said, let's all come together and not be the only one of its kind. Let's continue this discussion. Let's continue this kind of communion with everybody so that we address mental health issues, because the more we talk about it, the more we deal with it. I think that is very important. And I think it's a beautiful discussion. Dr. Vijayashree moderated it so well. So much for everybody. And so good that the connectivity didn't fail. It was a virtual meeting and everything went so well. So thank you for everything.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Monica. So thank you all. I request Neha to share some of the helplines that we put together. Neha, if you could just share that on the chat box for those who have joined us and would like to reach out. And also, yes, Eudaimonic Center is also available for you. We have a website, cpcw.org.in. Thank you all for being here. I know your struggles are there. All of us are struggling, but let's do it together and let's be the support system for each other. Thank you all and wishing you all good mental health in the year 2021.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Namaste.
Thank you, ma'am.
Namaskaram.
Namaste. 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 Good to see you all.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I should put all the helpline numbers that was in the MS Word given to me, right?
Yes, yes.
The Word
Neha.
document.
Yes, share that.
Just 2 minutes, ma'am. I'm doing this.
Yes.
chat box, ma'am.
Sorry, yes. So those of you who are interested in that could just take a screenshot of that perhaps. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining in. Goodbye and wishing you well.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Anyone else taking screenshot? Should I end the meeting? Guys, if you're done taking the screenshot, you can leave. I will end the meeting.